The twin suns burned above a dead land. The air shimmered with heat and the sand stretched for endless miles. There were no cities here, no roads, no sound, only wind and dust. A small figure walked across this desert, slow and weak. It was a girl. Her skin was pale blue, her hair long and tangled like silver wires. Her feet were bare and cut from the sharp stones. She was not from this world. She was an alien and she was alone. Her name was lost. Her people had left her behind. For days she had eaten nothing but dry roots and a few drops of bitter water. Every night she slept under broken metal, the remains of old ships from a forgotten war. The war had destroyed her home and turned her into a wanderer. As the suns dropped low, painting the sky in red and gold, the girl saw something strange in the distance. A thin line of smoke rose from the desert floor. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant life. Her heart began to race. Could there be another survivor? She moved closer, crawling behind rocks and sandhills until she reached the edge of a dry valley. There at the center she saw a man, a human. He was tall and strong, his skin darkened by the sun, his hands covered in dust. He wore simple clothes made from animal skin. But what caught her eyes was what he was doing. He was building. The human was stacking rocks one by one, slowly and carefully, forming a small wall. Around him were piles of stones, sand, and broken metal pieces. He worked in silence, sweat running down his face, his movement steady and sure. The girl crouched behind a boulder, watching. Why is a human here? She thought. No human can survive this planet. No one can, but he was alive and strong. Hours passed. The man never stopped. He lifted heavy rocks like they were nothing. When the suns fell and darkness came, he lit a fire with dry bones and old wood. He sat beside it, eating something from a metal bowl. The girl wanted to run. She wanted to speak. But fear held her still. Suddenly, the man lifted his head. His eyes, brown and calm, looked directly toward her hiding place. Her heart froze. Had he seen her? She pressed her back against the rock, trying to stay silent. But then she heard his voice, deep and quiet. I know you're there, he said. You can come closer if you want. The girl didn't move. He didn't sound angry. His voice was calm, almost kind. But she stayed hidden. She had learned not to trust anyone, not after the hunters came. The wind blew harder. The fire flickered. The man turned his eyes back to the flames and said nothing more. That night the girl stayed awake, watching him from the shadows. And far away, across the desert, something else was watching too. Two dark shapes moved across the night sky, fast and silent. They were ships, sleek and deadly, leaving faint trails of blue light behind them. Inside, two elite aliens spoke in their cold metallic voices. The target's signal was last seen in this sector, one said. She cannot hide forever, the other replied. They were hunters from the same empire. The girl had escaped from soldiers made of muscle and machine. They had chased her for months across the stars. Now they had found her again. Below them, the desert trembled as their ship slowed. The girl felt the vibration under her feet. Her eyes widened in terror. She turned toward the human's small fire. He was still there, sitting calmly beside his rock wall, unaware that death was coming from the sky. She wanted to scream to warn him, but her voice caught in her throat. The sky burst with light as the two alien ships descended, kicking up sand and wind. The roar was deafening. The human stood up slowly, shielding his face. The girl ducked behind the rock again, trembling. The ships landed hard in the valley, crushing stones under their weight. Two tall figures stepped out, gleaming armor, glowing eyes, sharp claws. They were elite hunters, and they were unstoppable. The human didn't move. He stood still, eyes steady, hands empty. The girl whispered to herself, "Run, human." You can't fight them, but the man didn't run. He only looked up at the stars, then back at the two aliens, and then quietly, he said something that made the girl's heart stop. You shouldn't have come here. The elite hunters laughed, their voices harsh and cruel. The girl watched, frozen in fear and awe. The desert wind howled around them, and the human took a single step forward, toward monsters who could crush him with one blow. The ground shook again. The air was heavy with danger. The girl didn't know what would happen next. But one thing she did know, this human was not ordinary. He was different. And the desert, for the first time in years, felt alive again. Morning came with a pale red light. The twin suns rose slowly over the jagged rocks, and the desert wind whispered through empty canyons. The alien girl opened her eyes and found herself still hiding behind the boulder. Her body ached. The cold night had nearly frozen her. She peeked over the rock. The human was still there. He was awake early, already working. The fire had turned to ash, but he didn't rest. His hands moved with quiet purpose. He lifted heavy stones one after another, placing them with strange care. Every rock fit perfectly with the next, as if he could see the shape before it even existed. The girl could not understand him. No one built things here. This planet was cursed, dry, dying, and forgotten by the stars. Yet here was this human, turning dead stones into walls. She watched him for hours. Sometimes he stopped to drink from a small flask. Sometimes he stood and looked at the horizon, silent, calm, as if listening to something the wind was saying. The girl's stomach growled. She hadn't eaten in days. Her head spun. She wanted to leave, but her legs felt weak. When the human finally turned his head, she gasped and ducked, but his voice came again, deep and steady. "You're still there," he said. She froze. "You can eat," he added, and tossed something toward her hiding place. A piece of dried food wrapped in cloth. The girl stared at it. It smelled strange but warm. She waited a long time before crawling forward to take it. When she looked up, he wasn't watching. He had already gone back to his work. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. That night, the human built a small roof from flat stones and dry vines. The firelight flickered against the wall, casting long shadows. The girl stayed hidden but closer now, near the edge of the camp. She could hear the crackle of the fire and the soft rhythm of his hands shaping the rocks. For the first time in years, she felt something new. Safe. But the safety was fragile. Every sound in the distance made her flinch. Every flash in the sky made her think of the hunters. Still, the man kept working. When she finally gathered enough courage to speak, her voice was thin and broken.
Why are you building this?"
The man looked at her, his eyes quiet and thoughtful. "Because there should be homes," he said, "even in places where everyone gave up." She didn't understand his words, but the way he said them made her chest tighten. Homes. She had not heard that word in years. The human returned to his wall. The girl came closer step by step until she stood near the edge of his work. She touched one of the stones. It was smooth and warm from the sun. He nodded slightly. "You can help if you want." Her hands trembled. "I don't know how." "Then I'll show you," he said simply. He picked up a small rock and handed it to her. "Start here." The girl stared at the stone. It was heavy, but she held it tight. The human showed her where to place it, how to find balance between the rocks. Slowly, she copied his movements. The wall rose higher, bit by bit, their hands moving in rhythm. When they finished a section, the human stepped back and smiled, not wide, but real. "You learn fast," he said. The girl almost smiled back. Almost. For a while, they worked in silence. The desert wind softened around them, carrying the smell of fire and stone. Then, without warning, the ground rumbled again, deep and heavy, like thunder beneath the sand. The girl froze. Her heart began to race. She knew that sound. The human noticed it too. He stood still, eyes narrowed, listening. The sky above shimmered faintly, and for a second she thought she saw a reflection, something metallic far away. "They're coming," she whispered. He looked at her calmly. "The ones from last night?" She nodded quickly, fear shaking her voice. "They won't stop. They'll kill both of us." The human wiped his hands on the dust. "Then we'd better finish this wall." She stared at him, speechless. "You don't understand. They're hunters. They can't be stopped." He gave her a long look. "Everything can be stopped," he said. "You just need to know where to stand." The girl didn't know what that meant, but something in his eyes made her believe him, even if she didn't want to. Night came again. The two of them sat near the half-built house. The stars shone brighter than ever. The girl leaned against the stone wall, feeling its warmth from the fire. For the first time, she didn't feel like running. She looked at the man. "Who are you?" He poked the fire with a stick. "Just a builder," he said softly. The girl frowned. "You're not just a builder." The man smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But that's who I choose to be." Above them, far in the darkness, two faint lights appeared, blue and sharp like blades in the sky. The hunters were watching, waiting for dawn. The girl didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But deep inside, she felt something new, a strange small spark of hope. Maybe this human was more than he seemed. And maybe this house of rocks was not just a shelter. Maybe it was the beginning of something powerful, something that could stand even against the stars. The desert slept under a pale moon. The wind was silent now, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The alien girl sat beside the half-built stone wall, her silver hair glowing softly in the firelight. The human was across from her, sharpening a flat piece of metal. She could not sleep. Her heart was heavy with fear. Somewhere out there in the dark sky, the hunters were moving. She could feel them the way one feels a storm before it comes, deep, cold, and certain. The human glanced up. "You hear them too," he said quietly. She nodded. "They don't stop. Once they have your scent, they follow until you're dead." The man didn't seem afraid. He placed the sharp metal aside and stood. "Then we should be ready." Ready. The word sounded strange to her. No one was ever ready for the hunters. They worked together in silence through the night. The human gathered more rocks, stacking them in patterns she didn't understand. Thick at the bottom, narrow at the top, curved like a shield. He moved quickly, his strength almost unreal. Every time she tried to help, he showed her how to place the stones with patience, as if he had built homes 1,000 times before. When dawn came, their hands were raw, their clothes dusty. But the wall stood tall now, not a ruin, not a pile, but something alive. The girl looked at it and whispered, "It's beautiful." The human smiled faintly. "Strong things don't have to be beautiful," he said, "but sometimes they are." Before she could answer, the sky split open with a flash of blue. She gasped. "They found us!" 2 dark ships cut through the morning clouds, roaring low over the desert. Sand flew in every direction. The sound was deafening, like thunder made of metal. The human didn't flinch. He only said one word, "Inside." The girl ran behind the stone wall as the ships landed with a violent crash. Dust covered everything. When it cleared, 2 tall figures stepped out. They were enormous, armored in black metal that shimmered like oil, their eyes glowing with red light. Their weapons were sharp, humming softly with energy. They moved with slow, perfect grace, confident, deadly, proud. The girl knew them. She remembered their faces, their voices. "Do you remember me?" The first one said, his voice deep and cruel. "You ran from the Empire. You stole what was ours." The girl trembled. "I didn't steal anything." The second hunter laughed. "You ran, little worm. That is crime enough." His gaze turned to the human. "And who is this? A pet, a slave?" The human stepped forward. The sunlight caught his face, and calm, unreadable. "She's under my roof," he said simply. "Leave." The hunters stared at him in disbelief, then burst into laughter. "You?" one sneered. "A human? You think you can order us?" The girl wanted to pull him back, to scream at him to hide, but he didn't move. "She's not yours to take," the human said again. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the valley like the sound of a blade. The hunter's laughter stopped. The air grew cold. "Kill him," the leader said. One hunter charged. His feet cracked the sand. His blade hummed as it came down toward the human's head, but the man stepped aside, fast, smooth, and grabbed a nearby rock the size of a man's chest. With one motion, he swung it down. The impact echoed like thunder. The hunter's armor shattered. His body hit the ground and didn't move. The girl covered her mouth, eyes wide. The second hunter roared and leaped forward, his claws cutting through the air. The human dropped to the sand, rolled, and grabbed another stone. He threw it with both hands. It struck the hunter's chest with a deep crack. He stumbled back, roaring, his armor breaking apart. The human didn't stop. He ran forward, slammed his shoulder into the alien's chest, and pushed him against the wall. With a burst of strength, he lifted a giant boulder from beside the fire pit and brought it down. The ground shook. The sound was final. Then, silence. The girl couldn't breathe. The 2 elite hunters, feared across 100 worlds, lay broken in the sand. The human dropped the boulder and stepped back, breathing hard but steady. His eyes were calm again, as if nothing had happened. The girl's voice trembled. How did you do that?" He looked at her. "They were heavy," he said, "but rocks are heavier." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He turned toward the bodies. "Others will come," he said. "We have little time." He began to pull the broken stones back into place, fixing what the battle had damaged. The girl watched him, still shaking. Two monsters lay dead before her, not by lasers or bombs, but by one man and a few stones. She looked at him with new eyes. He wasn't just strong. He was something else. "What are you?" she whispered. The human didn't look up. "A builder," he said. But the way he said it made the air feel strange, like the word meant something much bigger than it sounded. The girl stood in silence, staring at the man, the wall, and the blood on the sand. Somewhere in the distance, a faint light blinked in the sky, a signal from the hunter's ship, calling for reinforcements. The girl didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The desert was quiet again, but the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was afraid to move. The two dead hunters lay half buried in sand, their armor cracked, their weapons broken. Smoke drifted from their ships nearby, filling the valley with the smell of burnt metal. The alien girl stood still, her hands shaking. She had seen death before and many times, but never like this. Not from a human. Not with stones. The man stood beside the fallen boulder, breathing slowly, his shirt torn and his arms covered in dust. His eyes were calm, almost peaceful. He looked at the bodies, then at the horizon, as if waiting for the next storm. Finally, the girl found her voice. "You killed them?" "With rocks," the man nodded once. "Rocks don't miss." She didn't understand how he could speak so quietly after what had happened. The ground still felt alive beneath her, trembling with echoes of the fight. She looked at him again. His body was ordinary, his tools simple, but there was something in him, something more powerful than any weapon she had seen. He turned toward her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "Good," he said, picking up a small stone. He turned it over in his hand, studying its shape. "A wall can be broken," he said softly, "but it can also be built again." He walked back to the half-finished house and began to repair it, as if killing two elite hunters was just another part of the day. The girl followed him slowly. "You're not afraid they'll send more?" "They will," he said. "They always do. Then why stay here?" she asked, her voice rising. "Why not run?" He placed another rock in the wall and pressed it firm. "Because if you keep running, you never build anything that lasts." The girl stared at him. The words hit deep. She had run her whole life, from planets, from soldiers, from the past. She had never built anything, never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. The man glanced at her. "You can leave if you want," he said, "but I'm staying." She hesitated, looking at the half-built home, the smoking ships, the open sky, and then she said quietly, "No, I'll stay." That night, the desert wind howled again, carrying whispers of metal wings and distant storms. The girl couldn't sleep. She sat near the fire, watching the human-shaped rocks even in the dark. His hands were rough, but his movements were gentle, careful, almost patient, like a sculptor shaping hope out of the earth itself. Finally, she spoke. "Why do you help me?" He didn't look up. "Because someone once helped me." "Who?" "A builder," he said. "Long ago." His voice was quiet, but the sadness in it was deep. The girl wanted to ask more, but the wind grew stronger, and the fire flickered low. In the distance, a faint hum broke through the night. The sound made her freeze. Engines. She looked up, blue lights far away but moving fast. "They found us again," she whispered. The man rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Good," he said. "Good?" She shouted. "They'll kill you!" He picked up the heavy boulder, the same one he had used before, and placed it near the wall. "Then I'll be ready." His calmness terrified her more than the ships. Moments later, the sky cracked open with sound. Two new ships came down low, bigger than before, painted with the symbols of the elite order. The sandstorm they created burned her skin as they landed. Out stepped two hunters, larger than the first pair, armor glowing with red heat. One carried a massive hammer-like weapon. The other had a whip of light that sizzled through the air. The leader's voice echoed across the valley. "You killed my brothers, human." The man didn't answer. He only picked up a rock and weighed it in his hand. "You will die slowly," the hunter said. The girl hid behind the wall, clutching her chest. She wanted to run again, but something inside her wouldn't let her. The human stepped forward, his shadow long against the sand. "Then stop talking," he said. The hunters charged. The first swung his hammer, but the man ducked and rolled, the weapon smashing into the ground, sending dust high into the air. Before the hunter could lift it again, the man slammed the boulder into his legs. The alien roared, stumbling. The second hunter lashed his whip. Glowing light wrapped around the man's arm, burning through his skin. The girl screamed, but the man pulled hard, yanking the hunter toward him. With his free hand, he hurled the same boulder into the alien's chest. The force threw the creature backward into the other one. Both fell. The ground cracked under their weight. The man tore the whip from his arm and threw it aside. He walked forward slowly, grabbed a massive rock from the fire pit and lifted it above his head. The two aliens tried to rise, but he dropped it with all his strength. The sound shook the valley. When the dust cleared, the hunters were still. The girl came out from behind the wall, her eyes wide with shock and tears. The human stood above the bodies, breathing hard, his silhouette glowing orange in the firelight. He looked at her. Not proud, not angry, just calm. "You see?" he said softly. "Rocks don't lose." The girl couldn't speak. She just stared at him, her heart beating fast. For the first time, she didn't see a man. She saw something older, something stronger than war, than fear, than death. He turned back to the wall and placed his hand on the stones. "We'll need to build higher," he said. She nodded slowly. "Yes, higher." The stars above flickered faintly, and far beyond them, more signals were moving, ships from the Empire. Drawn by the beacon of battle, the war was coming closer. But for the first time, the girl didn't feel alone. The days that followed were strange. The desert was quiet again, but the air carried the smell of dust, metal, and something new: hope. The human and the alien girl worked side by side beneath the twin suns. The half-ruined wall had become a full circle now, a real home taking shape from the desert floor. The girl had never known what it felt like to build something that lasted. Her life had been all about running, hiding, and surviving. But now, her hands were busy shaping stones, smoothing edges and fitting pieces together. Every rock she placed made the house feel more real, more hers. The human worked with the same silent rhythm as always. He moved like someone who knew the earth itself, who understood how it breathed and broke. His hands bled, his shoulders were scarred. But he never stopped. Sometimes he spoke, short sentences, quiet and calm, little lessons about weight, balance, and patience. "Don't fight the stone," he said one morning as she struggled with a heavy block. "Let it show you where it wants to sit." She frowned. "Stones don't talk." He smiled slightly. "They do if you listen long enough." She didn't understand what he meant, but when she placed the stone again, it fit perfectly. By the third day, the wall was taller than both of them. The girl had begun carving small marks into the stones, her own designs, symbols from her lost world. The man didn't stop her. He only nodded in approval. When they finished a section, the girl sat back, her arms trembling from the effort. "It's strong," she said proudly. The man looked at the wall and nodded. "Strong enough to stand," he said, "but not strong enough yet to protect." "Protect from what?" she asked, though she already knew. He looked toward the horizon where the sky shimmered faintly. "They'll come again. They always come." The girl's smile faded. She thought of the hunters, their armor, their cold eyes, their cruel laughter. She thought of the ship still floating somewhere above the clouds. "Why not leave?" she asked quietly. "You could escape. You could live." The human wiped sweat from his face and answered without looking at her. "If I leave every place that turns dangerous, I'll never have a home." She didn't know what to say. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the wind filled the space between them, gentle, tired, endless. That night they sat by the fire. The girl roasted a strange desert fruit on a stick, while the human worked on shaping a long piece of rock into a flat, smooth slab. "What are you making?" she asked. "Something to hold the roof," he said. She smiled faintly. "You're really going to finish it, aren't you?" He nodded. "Homes must be finished. Otherwise they stay ghosts." The words stayed in her mind. Ghosts. That was what she had been. A shadow, a runaway, a piece of something that used to live. Now with every stone she lifted, she felt herself becoming real again. Days turned into weeks. The wall became a circle, the roof rose, and the fire pit moved inside. The girl planted small desert flowers near the doorway, though she knew they might never bloom. Still, it made her smile. One evening, as the suns were setting, she stood before the finished stone house. It wasn't big, it wasn't perfect, but it was solid, warm, and alive. She looked at the man. "It's done," she said softly. He studied the house for a long moment before replying, "Almost." He walked to the edge of the valley and began gathering the broken metal from the fallen ships. The girl followed, curious. "What are you doing?" He pointed at the pieces. "If they come again, we'll need more than walls." He carried the metal back and began embedding sharp edges into the outer stones, hidden blades, traps and spikes disguised among the rocks. The girl watched in silence, understanding now. The house was not just a home. It was a fortress. When the night came, the wind was soft and cool. The girl lay beside the fire inside their new home. The roof of stone above her felt strong and comforting. She looked at the man and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer right away. He was staring into the fire, lost in thought. Then he said, "Once someone built a home for me. I never got the chance to protect it. Maybe this time I can." The girl frowned. "Who was it?" He smiled sadly. "Someone who believed that even in a broken world, people still deserve shelter." The flames danced between them, warm and bright. For the first time, the girl felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. But peace doesn't last long in a world that remembers war. Far away, high above the clouds, a small blinking light began to pulse again. A signal from one of the destroyed ships. It was calling to something much larger, something that was already on its way. The human looked up at the night sky, as if he could hear it. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed calm. "We'll need stronger walls," he said quietly. The girl nodded, her voice low but firm. "Then let's build them." And under the twin moons, two silhouettes worked again. A man who built from stone and a girl who had finally found a reason to stay. Night fell like a blanket of blue fire over the desert. The new stone house glowed faintly under the twin moons. For the first time, it looked alive, strong, silent, and proud. The alien girl sat near the fire inside, tracing her fingers along the rough wall she had helped build. Each stone carried a memory, her fear, her sweat, and her hope. The human sat nearby, sharpening a metal shard. Sparks flickered and disappeared into the dark. His face was calm, but his eyes were not resting. They were listening, always listening. Outside, the wind had changed. It no longer sang softly through the dunes. It whistled. It warned. The girl felt it too. Something in the air was wrong. Heavy, electric, alive with unseen eyes. Then she saw it. A flash of light streaked across the sky. A bright blue pulse, quick and rhythmic. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't a star. It was a signal. She stood, her chest tight. "They found us," she whispered. The human didn't move. He kept watching the sky. "Yes," he said quietly. The girl's voice trembled. "That ship, the one we didn't destroy, it's calling them." He nodded once. "They're coming." Her hands shook. "Then we have to leave." "We can take the small ship," he interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. "No." She stared at him in disbelief. "No, you want to stay? You don't understand what's coming." The man turned to her, eyes steady as stone. "I understand better than you think." The girl's throat felt dry. "Then why aren't you afraid?" He placed the metal shard down and looked at the wall. "Because fear doesn't build anything. It only breaks." She didn't know how to argue with that, but her heart still pounded like thunder in her chest. The next day, the desert was too quiet. No birds, no wind, not even the whisper of sand. The girl helped the man stack more rocks, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she looked at the sky, she expected to see ships. Every sound made her flinch. The human, as always, worked without pause. He built taller walls, digging the base deeper into the ground. He reinforced the roof, shaped tunnels under the floor, and buried sharp stones around the edges. Finally, she asked, "Why are you doing all this?" He wiped the dust from his face. "Because when they come, we won't run. We'll stand, but we can't win against them," she said. "They're machines, soldiers. You can't fight an army with rocks." He looked at her, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes. A deep, old pain. You'd be surprised what a wall can do when someone refuses to fall behind it. That evening, she found him sitting alone outside, staring at the horizon. The sun was setting, turning the desert gold and red. She sat beside him quietly. "You've done this before," she said softly. "Haven't you?" He nodded. "Long ago. Did you win?" He paused. "No." The word hung in the air, heavy as stone. "What happened?" she asked. "I built a home for others. A safe place. But I was too late. The war reached it before the walls were strong enough." The girl looked down, her heart aching. "And now you're trying again?" "Yes," he said. "Because maybe this time the walls will hold." They sat together in silence as the sun vanished completely. The stars burned brighter than usual, almost trembling in the black sky. Then the sound came, deep, distant, and rising. The girl's heart dropped. Engines, dozens of them. The human stood, brushing sand from his hands. "It's time," he said, the girl's voice cracked. "You knew they'd come today." He nodded once. "The signal called them. The Empire never waits long." She looked around frantically. "There's nowhere to hide." "Good," he said. "That means we fight." The first lights appeared on the horizon, tiny sparks of blue and red growing larger with every second. The air vibrated with power. The ships were descending fast. The girl ran inside, her mind racing. "We'll die here!" The human followed her inside the stone house, calm as ever. "Then we'll die standing." He placed his hand on the wall. "This house was built to last," he said. "Now it must prove it." The girl trembled but said nothing. She picked up a sharp metal rod and held it tight. The fire crackled between them, glowing against the stone. Outside, the sky filled with light. The roar of engines drowned the wind. Sand exploded upward as the first ship landed, then another and another. The ground shook like a heartbeat. The girl turned to the human. "There are too many." He looked toward the doorway, eyes steady. "Then the wall must hold longer." The sound of metal footsteps echoed through the night. Voices in alien tongues shouted commands. Red beams of light cut across the valley. The girl's fear was a storm inside her chest. But the man didn't move. He just waited, patient, silent, unbroken. Finally he whispered, "When they come, stay behind the stones. Watch what a builder can do." She swallowed hard. "You're not just a builder," he smiled faintly. "No, but that's what I want them to believe." And as the first blast hit the wall, shaking dust from the ceiling, the stone house did not fall. It stood strong and proud, like the heart of the man who built it. Outside, the war had arrived. Inside, hope refused to die. The first explosion shook the valley like thunder trapped beneath the ground. Dust fell from the stone ceiling. The alien girl covered her ears, her heart racing faster than her thoughts. Outside, the roar of engines and alien voices filled the air. The Empire had arrived. Dozens of ships hovered above the desert, their lights cutting through the darkness like knives. Elite soldiers poured out, their armor glowing with red energy. They moved with precision, spreading out in circles around the small stone home that stood in the middle of the wasteland. It was a strange sight, a fortress made of rocks, standing proud against an army made of metal. Inside, the human stood still. His face was calm, his hands covered in dust and scars. He looked at the girl who gripped a sharp metal rod, trembling. "You stay behind the wall," he said. "I can fight," she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked at her with steady eyes. "You already are." Then he turned, stepped into the doorway, and walked out into the light. The soldiers saw him at once, a single man standing before their fleet. They laughed. The sound was sharp and cruel. "Where is the alien girl?" one shouted through his mask. The human didn't answer. He lifted a handful of sand and let it fall slowly through his fingers. "She's under my roof," he said. "That means she's mine to protect." The soldiers raised their weapons. Blue light flickered along their rifles. "Then you'll die with her," one hissed. The human nodded once. "If I must." The first shot fired on a bolt of burning light. It struck the stone wall beside him and exploded into sparks. But the wall did not break. The human moved like wind, fast, low, and silent. He picked up a flat piece of metal and hurled it. It sliced through the air, hitting a soldier's neck. The alien fell, armor cracking. The girl watched from inside, her hands gripping the edge of the wall. The human was outnumbered, 50 to 1, but he moved as if the world itself bent around him. He darted behind rocks, used broken ship parts as shields, threw stones so hard they shattered armor. Each move was fast, precise, and terrifyingly human. No magic, no machine, just muscle, grit, and will. The soldiers began to hesitate. They fired wildly, their shots slamming into the wall, but the stones held strong. The girl ducked behind them, covering her head. She could hear the man shouting orders, not to anyone else, but to himself. Hold the wall. Breathe. Stand. Each word was like a heartbeat. The girl crawled to the small window slit and looked out. The desert was chaos, smoke, sand, fire. The man fought among it all, moving through the dust like a shadow of iron. A massive alien soldier, taller than the others, carrying a glowing spear, stepped forward. His voice boomed like thunder. "Enough, human," he shouted. "You think you can defy the Empire with stones?" The human stood still, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. "Not with stones," he said. "With hands." The alien roared and charged. The man waited, one heartbeat, two, and then stepped aside. The spear struck the ground, cracking it open. The human grabbed a rock from the wall and slammed it into the soldier's helmet. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed across the desert. When it stopped, the giant didn't move again. The girl ran out then, unable to stay inside any longer. "Stop, you'll die," she shouted. The man looked at her, his eyes fierce but kind. "Then die with me," he said softly. "Behind the wall you helped build." He turned and threw another stone, a boulder-sized chunk that rolled down the slope, crushing 2 soldiers at once. The rest began to retreat, shouting in panic. Their ships lifted, engines screaming. One crashed into another, bursting into flame. The human stood tall, watching them flee. His clothes were torn, his arms bleeding, but his voice was steady. "It's over," the girl whispered. "For now," he said. "But they'll return." She stepped closer. "Then we'll rebuild." He smiled, a small, tired smile that carried all the strength in the world. "Yes," he said. "That's what builders do." When the sun rose hours later, the desert was quiet again. Smoke curled into the dawn sky. The stone house still stood, scarred, cracked, but standing. The girl walked beside the human, her steps slow, her eyes full of wonder. "You saved me," she said softly. He looked at her. "No," he said. "We saved each other." She smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her bright alien eyes. The man picked up a rock, brushed the dust off it, and placed it back into the wall. "Every home needs repairs," he said. "Even strong ones." The girl helped him lift another stone. Together they worked as the light of morning touched their faces. The wall rose again, piece by piece, stronger than before. Above them, the stars faded. The Empire would come again, maybe tomorrow, maybe years later. But the house would wait. A builder's hands had shaped it. A lost girl's hope had made it home, and now in a dead desert under 2 suns, something human had conquered fear. The last line of the story was written not in words, but in stone. A builder stands even when the world falls.